Outstanding work of our change agents and Dr. Johnny Cruz Craig, we worked on different topics, not just the normal thing. We worked on culturally relevant teaching, social and emotional learning, trauma-informed classrooms, and the whole child, just to name a few.
In terms of what you all are doing and what it means to us and what it means to everyone, education is a foundational key. I think it was George Washington Carver that said education is the key to freedom, which is the tie and the link between education and social action.
Delta pushed early on that it's not just matriculating through a scripted curriculum that may not teach needed life and adaptive skills. We have been pushing through our gyms and other programs that you need to focus on educating the whole person so that our next generation has the basic life skills to navigate and adapt in now an even more demanding and unrelenting world environment.
Good evening and welcome. So before we get started, remember, you can attend this town hall on Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, and the Facebook page for DTEC-TAG. Welcome to Equity in Education in ESSA, elevating learning during and post-COVID-19. I'm Denise Harrington with the welcome, and tonight's program is brought to you by the DTEC-TAG team, which is Delta Teacher Efficacy Campaign and Teachers Advocating for Great Change. And the team comes from the District of Columbia, Maryland, and Virginia, or known as DMV. Our full team members are Danielle Mills, Dr. Candace Boyd Wyatt, Therion T.J. Baker II, Dr. Renata Hedrington Jones, Dr. Urith Bowen, Rain Bradley, Terry Pollard, Zuli Culpepper, and Angela Van. The coordinating team, since this is a second series in equity with the DTEC-TAG initiative, our coordinating planning team tonight consists of Veronica Menifee, Joanne Otis, Crystal Pauls, and myself, Denise Harrington. The next voice that you're going to hear from one of our nation's largest school divisions, New York City, will be our moderator for the evening, Dr. Marilyn Brown.
Hello, 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 and good evening, good evening. Welcome, welcome, and welcome. Welcome to this most monumental webinar, town hall meeting, and such a timely session as this. You know, we are all going through COVID-19 right now, and education is extremely at a standstill, progression. It's at a place that we've never seen before. And to discuss this tonight, I'd like to introduce Dr. Nashay Bennett.
Good evening, everyone.
Ms. Erica Strauss-Chavarria.
Good evening.
Dr. Marco Clark.
Good evening, everyone.
Nicole Nelson.
Good evening, everyone.
And Leah Dozer Walker.
Good evening, everybody.
Good evening, and thank you all for being here today. This is going to be a lively and exciting conversation. My favorite topic, education. So I'm going to just throw it out there. I'm not going to hold back, and I hope you don't hold back too. I'd like everyone, just before we begin, is to introduce themselves and say a little bit to the audience about your expertise and where you're coming from.
I am Nashay Bennett. I am an elementary school principal. I've been a principal now for 13 years. 11 of those years have been spent in Title I school. I received my doctorate from Morgan State University with my topic of study being teacher retention in Title I schools. I'm really looking at the conditions of the workplace.
And next, Ms. Chavarria.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for having me tonight. My name is Erica Chavarria. I'm a 11th year Spanish teacher in Howard County. I actually graduated from the school that I teach at, Wild Lake High School. I am a trained practitioner in restorative justice. I work towards ending the school to prison pipeline. I'm on the board of several racial justice organizations, including the Anti-Racist Education Alliance, the Howard County Black Lives Matter at School 365 Coalition, Racial Justice Now, Equity for HC, and HOCO for Justice. I'm also a union leader, and I'm the founder of Columbia Community Care, an organization that I started amidst the COVID crisis when schools shut down in order to provide food and household items to families in need.
And next we have Dr. Clark.
Greetings, everyone. I'm Dr. Marco Clark. I'm the founder and chief executive officer of the Richard Wright Public Charter Schools for Journalism and Media Arts in Washington, D.C. I'm a 20-plus year veteran in the world of education. I've been a high school principal, teacher, assistant principal, and now founder of an organization. We've been open for approximately 12 years. We just finished building a $20 million edifice in downtown DC, of which we are really excited about. I received my doctorate degree from Morgan State University, undergraduate degree from Clark Atlanta University, and in between some master's degrees from Coppin State University and Goucher College. I sit on numerous boards. My focus is urban education. I'm an author and a national speaker across the world.
And Ms. Nicole Nelson.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Nicole Nelson. I'm an adjunct communications professor at the University of Maryland Global Campus. Prior to that, I was a journalist covering education in the Washington, D.C. suburbs and also the Philadelphia suburbs. And I'm a former two-term parent-teacher Student Association president, and I'm also my passion is education, so an education advocate.
Awesome. And Ms. Leah Dozer-Walker.
Hi, everyone. I'm Leah Walker. I am the Director for Equity and Community Engagement at the Virginia Department of Education, where our office is tasked with leading all initiatives and work to advance equity outcomes for students, primarily focusing on decreasing disproportionate outcomes for students across the spectrum, as well as implementing and advancing strategies that dismantle systemic inequity from our public education system. I am a graduate of Hampton University, undergrad in VCU for my graduate work. I'm very happy to be here with you all this afternoon and look forward to the conversation.
I'm so happy you all can join us. So we're going to jump right in. We're going to take a look at this illustration called Liberation. I just want you to take a few minutes to look at it and then tell us what you see. Tell us your point of views. There's lots of perceptions in the audience coming from different viewpoints. We all come from, although education is our passion, we all have different viewpoints. And I think it's good for the audience out there to hear your perspectives from expertise as to what they're looking at. So take a few minutes and we're going to look at these illustrations called Liberation. And then whoever would like to begin the conversation, we can just go forth.
I would like to speak on the equity, and I think what equity means to me as a parent is ensuring that all resources are available to meet every child where they are.
So I'll just share a few thoughts on this, on these images. We see these quite often in conversation and trainings around equity. And at the department, we've actually moved away from this imagery. One, because you've got to ask the question, right? Why are all of the participants behind the fence Black or brown? Though racial equity is certainly, or racial inequity is certainly significant, when we really think about implications around equity in our public education system, there are other populations of students and other ways that inequity manifests itself beyond just color. So the image in and of itself certainly is reinforcing some stereotypes there. We've actually moved at the department to utilizing images that focus more specifically and intentionally on the system as the cause of inequity rather than children, students, or participants in whatever the activity or situation might be. So I'll be happy to share our image when it's appropriate at the appropriate time, but we kind of struggle with this image quite a bit. When we think about equity as being, or equality is everybody getting a pair of shoes, equity is when everybody gets a pair of shoes that fits, right? So it's really about what are we putting in as inputs to produce equitable outcomes.
Thank you. And speaking of that, that's a perfect segue into our first question. Question number 1. What are ways to close the digital divide and supply students with what they need now? And I'll begin with you, Dr. Clark.
You know, I was sitting here and I was listening to my colleague there. One of the things to me that's so important is that I think the imagery itself, and I'm going to tie this all together. I think the imagery of what we saw really brings home the disparity between young people of color. And I think when you heighten the area of young people of color, you begin to hit these areas of divide. And that imagery itself highlights that there is a problem. And so I look beyond what the color does, but the color actually denotes that there is a problem in equity along equity and equality with students. And looking at school districts across the country that serve underserved students, typically this is part of the issue. And so when we go to the digital divide, which we all fell into in March of 2020, it was a surprise for everyone. And though we had been spewing equity across the board. We found that those areas that served kids that were Black and brown, we saw the disparities. They jumped out. And it was very clear that the students that were already 3 to 5 grade levels behind are now 5 to 9 grade levels behind. And we're still trying to talk about how we're going to close that gap. It's not just the digital divide, because we have provided every student with a brand new laptop, but then there was something else that had to happen. You had to provide these hotspots, but then there was something else that needed to happen. You had to provide to ensure that there was electricity in the house to make that happen. But then besides the electricity, you had to provide something else, an opportunity to create a safe place inside of a home that's already cramped. So we wind up buying some dividers to go inside of the homes in order for kids to have a place where they could study and learn. So when we look at equality, equity, and how we get to liberation is a far-fetched thing from what we're going to have. And so this digital divide is only getting larger. And while it is a buzzword of how we supply what students the devices and things that they need to supply students with, there's so many gaps that are still there, and nobody's talking about that. And so while it's a big deal to say, well, we are able to provide kids with laptops, but you miss so much. And if students don't have the appropriate programs or the ability to operate the programs, then the divide is still real. And so that we're there, and liberation is a far-fetched, which I think that picture really denoted that the distance between how we get to how we even get to liberation with our students.
And so I like to pose the same question to Ms. Chavarria in regards to ENL and bilingual students, because there's also another component to that. Can you chime in on that?
Yes, definitely. I teach Spanish primarily. I don't teach ESL. However, what we do know is that our Latino populations, not only are they facing, and first of all, the digital divide is just an exacerbation of inequities that already existed. This divide has been in existence, just that COVID has been the mechanism that it's in our faces, so we can't deny that it's there. I also want to make sure that we understand that when we're talking about equity and equality, and I think the shoe that fits that analogy also fits here, is that I know that many of our students are receiving devices that are not up to par with what they actually need. And so even though you're getting a device doesn't mean that it's still at the level of what a student actually needs in order to succeed. So there's that issue. In terms of our bilingual communities, not just Latino communities, but all bilingual communities, we know that generally in districts, it takes several days for translations of services to even come out to the public, to even get to the parents. If the parents don't have access to technology to receive the information of how to even receive technology, then we're missing an entire population of students. And then in addition to that, we have the language barriers that exist when the technology does come. We have the barriers of even understanding how to use the technology. And then we have a lot of families that are essential workers and are going out to work. And this is not just in the different speaking communities, Spanish speaking communities, but in addition to that, we have essential workers across the board who then have to make a choice between leaving their homes to go work to provide for their families, or quitting their jobs and staying home. And so even when we have students that do receive the technology, a lot of times we have situations in which families are not even there to assist, or parents are not there of no fault of their own to even assist their children in learning how to use the technology that is necessary. If you think about even a kid who's 10 years old who technically can stay home by themselves, feed themselves, is that student if they're having some difficulties or challenges even signing on to the device, or even with the stamina to sign on for every single meet. This is just a very impossible situation. And so I just want to drive home the point that these inequities have always existed. We're just facing just an exacerbation of the injustices and the inequities that we already see. And so we need to start thinking about that and making sure that we are providing all of the tools necessary that our kids can succeed, and not just saying that, okay, we threw a computer at you, you're good to go.
I think, you know, if we frame a conversation around the digital divide more about the at-home learning gap that exists, right? And that manifests itself in lots of different ways that include both access to technology or the infrastructure, the technology infrastructure to make that technology a viable alternative delivery system for instruction, which is what we're experiencing right now with COVID. I mean, in Virginia, nearly half of the state does not have access to high-speed internet in their communities. And we're not talking about because they can't afford it. We're talking about the infrastructure is actually not laid for them to have that access. And so that impacts students, not just now, but every single day of their academic careers. They are at a disadvantage in that they do not have access at home to the same instructional supports and learning resources that other students will have access to, just simply because of where they live or the type of community that they live in. So that's very significant. And that is a leadership proposition, right? That is something where the state has to say, we will invest in broadband for all communities across the state so that every child has access to those online learning resources, whether it be for delivery of instruction during a pandemic or it be to support their ongoing learning during the regular academic year. Both things are important, and both of them are a tremendous issue for many, many of our students. The other issue, though, is the inequity in terms of the deployment and availability of high quality technology resources to support student learning every single day. You'll see a great deal of variance across the state depending on the relative wealth of a community to deploy and provide those types of instructional programs for students and to train their faculty and teachers to deliver instruction in ways that are still engaging, culturally relevant. All of these things that we talk about in the classroom setting also have to be applied in a virtual setting as well, right? And so the capacity for districts and school leaders to actually train their instructional staff to deliver instruction in that way is really dependent upon the relative wealth of a community, and that in and of itself, right, is not equitable.
Oh, go ahead.
And just to add to that, the accessibility piece, just thinking about our parents. So we have the resources, or we're attempting to have the resources and make sure that students are connected, but we also have to make sure we have our teachers and other staff members available to parents to assist with that digital divide, because in some cases, parents are not familiar with the technology and they need to speak to a real live person. They need to understand what students are expected to do at home. And we don't want to have the technology itself as a tool becoming a barrier to our students and our parents. Just so, for example, a solution to that, one of the things that we do at my school is we have a helpline. There's a Google Meet set up, and there are 2 hours per day as a designated time where our community services resource coordinator is live, and she's there just waiting for questions from parents, staff members, and other community members. So just really making sure that we are focusing on technology, but also the human piece, and that parents are able to connect with a real live person so that they can support their children at home to assist with not having that divide. So I think that's an important point as well.
And we know that, Maryland schools are already pre-COVID billions of dollars underfunded, which is why we were attempting to get the Blueprint for Maryland's Future legislation passed in order to make sure that we were focusing on funding. So we are in a double deficit at this point. And I, as a teacher who is not savvy on technology, I rely on classroom interactivity, right? My classroom doesn't rely heavily normally on technology. And so I feel like sometimes that I'm failing my students because I do want to bring in the culturally responsive piece, and I attempt to do that, but my own internet goes out all the time. My students are sometimes left on the call and I'm off the call and I'm trying to get back in. And so, the wireless, the Wi-Fi piece is a huge problem. even for educators who are attempting to provide the best education possible under these circumstances. I know that almost every week I have an issue where my internet goes out and I cannot get on the Google Meet with my students.
So I want to say thank you. And I want you all to know, we as educators are not failing our students. We're doing the best that we can with what the districts are providing us with. And broadband is a big thing. And I just want to say, I work in a Title I school and I see it every day. In comparison to where I live, I was able to tell the HOA, hey, all these kids are now moving into our community. We need a stronger broadband. And it's been updated 3 times over since the last 7 years since I moved here. So yes, bandwidth is humongous. It's a big component of the whole digital divide. But now we're going to move on to question number 2. How can we leverage more impactful professional development for virtual learning in order for teachers to be able to effectively and confidently do their jobs online? I'm going to say this again, effectively and confidently do their jobs virtually. So I guess we'll start with, I know you were the last voice we heard, but we'll start with the classroom teacher. Ms. Chavarrera.
So having gone through this this year, what I will say is less is more at this point. I feel like we were bombarded with trainings in the beginning, and again, we're trying to fit a square peg in a round hole and mimic real classroom learning. And unfortunately, that's not how this works. And so having been through training after training after training, at some point, we get so overwhelmed with just try this technology and do this technology, and then you have to do this, and then you have to do this. And it feels incredibly overwhelming. And so I think impactful professional development would be very carefully laid out learning that integrates one bit of technology at a time. Understanding that we are all, I'm an 11th year teacher. I feel like a first year teacher trying to understand and trying to learn all of the technology, but having some grace with us, I think is really important. But also understanding that, giving us the tools that really do create a better classroom environment. For example, we at one point in my county did not have the ability to do breakout sessions. And so I know that on like Zoom, you can do breakouts, right? And so for a very long time, we only had the ability to be an entire class. We couldn't break out. Now we have breakout technology, which is wonderful through Google Meets, but we can't see all of the breakout rooms at the same time. And so making sure that the technology that we are learning is sufficient in order to effectively do our jobs online. And so I think, and then also making sure that, yes, we are going through a crisis right now. We are facing obstacles we've never faced before, but that does not mean that we stop thinking about anti-racist pedagogy, decolonizing our curriculum, building relationships with students to get to know them, making sure that we are integrating anti-racist teaching. These are all the things that we cannot set to the side in the name of technology, figuring out technology, because those things are too important. We cannot start policing our kids online either, and policing our parents. And so along with the professional development for technology, we need to make sure that we are continuing professional learning on bias training, anti-racism training, and how that can manifest, just as it does in a normal classroom, how that potentially can manifest online, because we've already seen cops being called on kids for things that are happening in their home. And so making sure that we are very aware that we are seeing our students in a whole new setting, that we need to be respectful of their homes and their home life. We need to be respectful of their families, and not allow the same manifestations of racism and bias that happen in a normal school building in a brick and mortar to then also occur online. So that needs to be part of the professional learning as well.
And Ms. Nelson, your thoughts?
Well, I would say when it comes to the professional development, quality versus quantity, and knowing your audience. So in an average school building, you have 3 generations. You have baby boomers right now, Generation X, millennials. And so there's some reluctancy to the technology, not because they don't want to do it. They just were never exposed to it. So knowing your audience and maybe doing collaborative professional training. If you have someone who's very tech savvy, maybe have them partner, peer mentoring could take place in order to bring the other person who is less savvy up to speed with the technology to help them with the online teaching. Because I know at my children's former school, we had one teacher who was amazing, who did her virtual classroom. She had all these where it mirrored her classroom, and the students could click different things and open up different activities. And on the other hand, the other teachers were not as tech savvy, so parents felt like, well, why do they get that and the other students don't get that? And that speaks to equity again. So if they could all just do it collaboratively.
And Dr. Clark.
Yeah, I think it takes leadership. I agree with both what young ladies had to say. I think leadership is the catalyst to all of this, and to make sure that you understand your staff. So understanding their learning styles and their abilities is very important. Sometimes having one-on-one dialogues, we got to have some follow-up. It can't just be evaluative. It has to be monitoring with coaching involved. So the leader has to exhibit that and make sure that they have a coaching hat on all the time in order to make people feel that they can, understand their job and that they're going to do it well, and that they are supported and understanding the direction that they need to go. So in order for this to happen, it encompasses everything they just spoke of, as well as having an effective leader or leaders in the building to ensure that they are able to work and be supported in their whole process.
And so Dr. Bennett, as a school building leader, what specifically can you share regarding professional development that you've encouraged your staff to participate in?
So weekly, we have a voluntary staff soiree with a variety of menu options. We provide a survey to teachers to find out what their interests are, as well as some of the observations when we visit classrooms, just in terms of needs. And teachers drop in, exchange ideas. Our staff development teacher actually leads the conversation. Teachers also have a variety of menu items from which to choose during professional development sessions. Every Wednesday, we have a full day of PD. Also giving teachers time to collaborate. I know a couple of panel members talked about being overwhelmed with so much. So I often give my staff the gift of time, because they need time to think about the thinking, actually, to plan lessons, to collaborate with one another. We also have model lessons that take place virtually at our school, just to make sure teachers are having an opportunity to hear and learn best practices. We provide incentives for teachers who like to try some of the strategies they've learned during the staff soiree, during that voluntary PD session. So just being responsive to the needs of teachers, because in this environment, teachers don't need more work. They need responsive support.
And everyone needs support. So speaking of support, I'd like to introduce Veronica Menifee, a DMV DTEC-TAG member and a special education consultant. She's going to show us some effective learning environments for virtual learning, which is a big portion of support. Veronica?
Thank you, Dr. Brown. I want to just thank the panelists so far for this rich conversation. I'm so enjoying it. And as Dr. Brown said, I am a special education consultant, and I work within the state of Maryland. So I work with parents, students, staff. I work with school districts, and I do this on a daily basis just to help everyone in this COVID situation. So I want to show a parent who went above and beyond. And if we can have the slide, I'll show you what she created for her preschooler, her third grader, and her sixth grader to set up the learning environment at home. And she used basic things from Dollar Tree. So she has things like bins in there. She has little cubes full of like cards and pencils. And so we'll go left to right. So the preschoolers section in the house is on the kitchen table. So you'll see numbers, you will see letters and everything that that child needs. The headphone hook is there. In the middle, you got the older children's learning environment. And what I love, she has everything they need right then and there. And they had input within it. Also, they have the schedule hanging up in each of the environments. And they also have a pencil pouch for other knickknacks that they would need for the day. And I think it's crucial that organization has to take place. And as I said, you don't have to spend a lot of money. You can go to Walmart, you can go to Dollar Tree, or you may use whatever you have at home. If it's just a table, if it's a snack table, whatever you have, you do not have to go out and spend a whole lot of money. Just make sure that your student is involved to get that buy-in so that they will want to go to that space. Make sure it's quiet, headphones or earpieces so that they can all learn effectively. But I definitely want to congratulate Deja Gladden, who is the parent who put this together with her particular children. And I told her I wanted to use this because I was just very blown away. So parents, just make sure that you involve the kids. And now I want Dr. Brown to go back to our panelists. Let's hear what they have to say and also talk about resources that they currently use within their schools to help set that learning environment.
Thank you, Veronica. And I want to say, as a special ed liaison within one of the largest school districts in the United States, having the children's input and using what you have, like Veronica said, is an important aspect. I know I've gone into homes via virtually and helped parents set up some little things, like taking sneaker boxes and making a table out of it and throwing a sheet over it. That becomes a desk. You know, like you said, I think Ms. Chavarria said, we have to use what we have and consider the parents' home and be respectful. So not everyone has the money to go out. And Dollar Tree, my favorite, not promoting anything, but those little coins put together are important for students. So let us get back to the questions. Question number 3, which is a good segue. What are the most valuable parental resources to support parents and guardians for their students' virtual educational needs? And I guess I'm going to start with Ms. Nelson, because you did mention having multiple children and multiple different grades, and God bless you.
Yes, I think the best parental resource is your parent network. I would also say if your school has a parent-teacher association, tap into their organization because they're usually keeping you up and keeping you abreast of things that are going on within the school. They have they have a good, in most schools, they have a good relationship with the administration so they can make sure that the communication pipeline is taking place. I would also say if your school does not have an active PTSA or PTO, you can have if your child plays a sport, use them as a network because people are going through the same thing. And when you feel like, okay, I'm not in this alone, you can, it makes you feel, it lessens the anxiety and the stress. And I would also say that we just collaborating, and as Veronica shared, those different tools that the parents shared. I mean, you can share how it's working virtually, virtual education is working in your home, and how each child is different. So you have to ensure that you have the resources for each child.
And now, Ms. Walker, can you speak to the parental resources as it relates to equity? Because sometimes we have resources and they're not equitable for our families.
Sure, yeah. So one of the things that I'm really proud of that we did at the Department of Education is we crafted what we called our R3 document, which was our return to school planning document, which included resources both for parents, teachers, students, school administrators, really that focused in on not just what is your strategy around reopening schools, but what are the supports and resources available to support student learning at home. When we first closed back in March, when the governor, by executive order, closed all of the schools in Virginia, everyone was rushing to sort of figure out how do we provide continuity of learning during this time period. And so during that period of time, we had what we called our Continuity for Learning document. In that document, we had an entire section focused on centering equity in continuity for learning and what are the equity considerations that school leaders, both at the school level and division level, need to be thinking about as they started to implement continuity of learning for students. Because there we saw, right, a great deal of inequity. We hadn't deployed technology resources. We didn't know what was happening with our students at home really that well. We didn't have infrastructure or systems in place to really know what were happening to our families that we already were aware of in crisis or may enter into crisis as a result of the pandemic. So we really wanted to provide some structure and resources to the field on how to do that work. You can find these documents. I want to keep the convo flowing, so I don't want to stop to share screen.
No, share though, because I was going to ask that question.
I can share. Let's see. I've never used this technology before, so let's see how this works. But I want to show you just on our website where we can. Okay, let's see. There we go. Let me pull this up here and you all give me a head nod or something so I know. Can you all see my screen now?
Not yet, but if tech can allow for that in some way, is that possible? I know I'm going all off.
It's something with Chrome apparently. Okay, wait a minute. Let me keep talking though. I'm not sure I'm going to be able to share my screen. But if you go to doe.virginia.gov, on the home page, there actually is a link right on the home page that says Virginia's Return to School Plan. And if you click there, it's organized by centering equity, the phased reopening plan. But if you scroll down, there's actually a section on student and staff supports, as well as a section on family and parent resources. And there we provide a great deal of online resources that families can access to support at-home learning. One of the other things I'm really, really particularly proud of is that we partnered with sort of non-traditional education partners to ensure that students who didn't have access to Wi-Fi or broadband still were going to have some access to instruction. And so we've done some creative partnerships with our public television stations, our Spanish radio stations, where they took a part of their programming schedule and dedicated it to providing instruction to students during that time. So if you didn't have a computer, you could turn your cable TV on and get some instruction for younger students. And then we partnered with Spanish radio as well to provide instruction over the radio in Spanish. And we utilized a cadre of teachers who were both Spanish speakers and familiar with the Virginia standards to craft that curriculum in a Spanish language so that those students and families would have resources as well. Again, I think what all of this really does boil down to at the end of the day is how well you think about with intentionality, supporting families in their efforts to support students at home and making sure that we sort of amplify in whatever ways we can that all families and caregivers have assets that contribute to the learning of students. Though those assets might look different, they do have they have the ability and the desire to support their learning. It's our role as educators to facilitate the most impactful way for them to engage, and where we see there are deficiencies, to connect with other wraparound providers that can fill in those gaps.
And I think so often that the lack of resources is it's confused for not caring. And that's not the case. And again, that's just another stereotype. And so I'd like Dr. Bennett, can you share with us some of the things that the parents in your school are doing, what they considered, or maybe you received some feedback as the most valuable resources that have been an aid to them?
Yeah. So our most valuable resource, according to our parents, really is the human resource piece. Just going back to that, being able to, we use our school funds to fund a school to community coordinator. So there's a designated person who acts as a catalyst between parents and schools. As I said, she's on a session 2 hours every day for parent questions. We also use our school budget to purchase the resources that were mentioned earlier for parents. So they have those hands-on tangibles. We're able to arrange for parents to come to the school outside and just have the grade level table set up. They retrieve resources from the school just to make sure we are removing those barriers and making sure that students have everything they need and there not be a financial issue in terms of students being able to have that educational environment, to be able to have hands-on manipulatives, pencils, paper, any and every resource we have provided to parents, because we want to make sure that all students are receiving equitable access to their education.
And then I know this might seem stereotypical, or maybe I'm picking on you, Dr. Clark, because you're a male, but I know in New York, we're finding a lot of fathers tending to their children like I've never seen before. A lot of fathers being at home fathers, single fathers, primary caregivers. They're the ones trying to keep up with their child's education. So, I mean, I'm just questioning, as an inquiry, have you heard anything from any males about valuable resources? Because, you know, what's important to one parent and one gender may not be, you know, we come from different genders and women and men, you know, Mars and Venus think a little differently. So have you heard anything from anybody?
From males?
Yes.
First of all, let's salute the males for being outstanding. Men are always criticized for not being involved. And so when we get a great group of men that are involved, let's salute them and support them. That's first and foremost. Second of all, what we do in my organization is that we have this group called Parent Nation. That is what my PTA is. It's called Parent Nation. And for the past, since March, we've been doing a Zoom call and creating a parent college every week. And the parent college is those small things to teach and give tips for parents how to navigate throughout this COVID situation. And parent college is there to actually train parents to become teachers. And involved with that, I've had a lot of males who have wanted to step in and be involved. And some of our men have been able to be involved because, I hate to say this, but some of the mothers have not allowed them to be involved with their child's life. And so since we're doing virtual, they're able to sign on and become part of their children's lives right there and be able to do a lot more from a virtual perspective than they've been able to do. So virtual situations has been helpful to men in a lot of ways of being able to help navigate and find out what's going on with their children. So in this parent college that we have weekly, we're training parents to become teachers. We're giving them look-fors to and tips on how to navigate through work, how to actually ensure that their child is on track. Also, we're teaching them how to provide some actual mentoring and support of the work, and then who to contact directly. So you're a parent, you don't know Algebra 2, but at least we have a direct line to the teacher that is teaching that class, that is open and has office hours. And what we've done, because we have a hybrid schedule, is that on Fridays we've had what we call office hours just in the virtual, where kids can come on and that day is solely there for students to ask questions, for parents to ask questions, to create clarity for that. And we've seen nothing but great engagement, and our Parent Nation is absolutely the bomb.
All right, Parent College and Parent Nation. I like that. But and like I said, I just want to make clear, I am saluting the men out there, and God forgive me for like stereotypical, always go to the mom, go to the grandma and auntie. But I have to say, men are stepping up, and I'm just so proud. So
you can't, but it's okay, because you cannot discredit our mothers and our aunts and our grandmothers, because you guys are the glue that's keeping the community together. And it is about time that our men step up. So I am excited that the men are finally doing what they're supposed to be doing, right? But we cannot discredit, because without women, and I'm saying this publicly, you guys are the glue and have been the strongest. And without you guys, nothing would be possible with the way that we are moving along education. So a salute to you guys, but I'm really proud of the fathers for being excellent. That's what I just want to say.
I'm sorry. Somebody was saying something. I'm sorry for cutting you.
I was just going to mention that, you know, I think a lot of what we're seeing with this, particularly with inequities and supporting our parents, is we've seen richer, whiter communities that are able to form these learning pods that are supplementing their students' education with these fancy learning pods, and they're all pulling their resources together, and they have the ability to do so, and they can all work from home. And so I think that, you know, making sure that our school systems are paying attention to our families who don't have all of those resources, and making sure that we are, you know, I as an educator take the responsibility of making sure that my parents can find their own, you know, can find communities of support, you know, searching. I know that I spent a lot of time with the organizations that I work with, searching for, you know, the learning pods of our own, and pulling together the community resources that we have. I know out in California, in some parts of California, there were many communities that were actually, and I don't advocate pulling students out of public school, but we're actually taking their students out of public school, saying, you know, we're not being served in school when there's not COVID in a real way, and so we're just going to create our own learning communities with particular focus on Afrocentric curriculum. And so I'm not advocating necessarily to pull students out of public school at all. But what I'm saying is that we need to be mindful of the exacerbated inequities now of these learning pods that are popping up in different communities, and making sure that we as educators and we as community supports are doing the best we can to provide opportunities for our parents to supplement their students' education as well. Because we have parents that can't afford a $1,000 tutor, that communities, you know, whiter, richer communities can afford those, you know, those supplements, and also make sure that at the end of all of this, that we are pushing for policies that are fair, and that we don't allow what is happening now with the inequities to then affect a student's trajectory through life. That we're pushing for policies that are fair and equitable in terms of the, you know, access to college, access to future opportunities, that do not allow what the inequities that exist now to impact our students in the future, and making sure that our parents are aware of all of those resources as well. We just need very clear communication, and I think one of the best resources for our parents are the teachers. We need to be in constant communication, you know, to make sure that we are, you know, collaborating, that we address the needs of the family.
And, you know, I have to say, before we go on to the next question, in New York, we have something called the Learning Bridges program. And so when your child is not brick and mortar, it's a public pod, CDC guidelines, of course. But that's one of the things I am proud of working for New York City Department of Education, that they saw the need. Because again, yes, when I heard about the pods, and I'm like, oh my goodness, our families don't have that money. And then New York, they answered the call. So I'm very excited about the Learning Bridges. And I hope that people out there in different districts who don't have Learning Bridges or public school pods find the money for the policy to make it happen for the kids. So our next question, when it comes across the screen, are we getting to our next question? Okay, so I'll read it. Let's see here. TAG, do we have the next question? All right. What are the most, where do we need to be, and how can we get there with all that is happening with inequities within the educational funding from school district to district? Oh, I just came from a meeting about that. Where do we need to be? This is a very loaded question. And how can we get there with all that is happening with inequities within educational funding from school district to school district? And then I'm going to start with Dr. Bennett, let's hear it. I know budgets, administration,
Yes.
instruction. Go ahead.
Exactly. We have to be strategic and when thinking about how to utilize our budgets, we have to think outside the box, be creative, make sure that we are allocating our resources properly so that students are receiving everything they need. And one of the main pieces in terms of what students need are highly qualified teachers and highly skilled teachers. That's where we're going to get the most bang for our buck. The investment has to be in the people. So if there's anything that is being cut, it cannot be teachers and it cannot be resources to schools. So however we're being creative with our staffing, that's a high priority, because you can have all the technology in the world and you can have all the materials in the world, but if you do not have sound, qualified teachers in front of your boys and girls, then you're not going to have that success, and you're going to continue to have an opportunity gap and an achievement gap. So I say, when there are budgetary cuts, it cannot be to teachers.
One of the things we've tried to do at the state level is really think about how can we incentivize good practice as it relates to resource allocation at the local level. One of the things that we found when we really looked at our data was that as the concentration of poverty in schools increases in Virginia, so does the likelihood that you will have a teacher who is inexperienced in front of your classroom. So either provisionally licensed or a new teacher. In Virginia, when concentration of poverty in a school gets to about 80%, so those are like, your Title I schools, you are almost 3 times as likely to have a new or provisionally licensed teacher teaching your class. And so, and provisionally licensed means, like me, I have a degree in political science and I want to teach history, but I don't have any education in how to teach, right? So that's a provisionally licensed teacher, meaning they have some subject matter content expertise, but they don't know pedagogy. They don't know instructional practice, right? So one of the things that our state board of education has been looking at is through what we call the standards of quality, which is the formula that drives how schools are funded in Virginia. How can we implement levers that drive and incentivize the assignment of teachers in a way that don't cause our most vulnerable school communities and students to be adversely impacted by teacher shortage? How do we do that? What are the public policy levers that we can pull to cause that to happen? But at the end of the day, so long as school funding formulas are driven by local tax revenue, we will continue to see vast inequity in our public education systems. And we have to acknowledge that that's the intent. That's why the system was built that way, to create the haves and the have-nots. The system was created that way to continue to perpetuate oppression. While that may not be the intent today, that was certainly the intent when those systems were developed, when decisions were made to vest all authority for the administration of public schools with local school boards that are elected locally. That creates inequity across the state, right? And so we have to acknowledge and know that the reason why we have the barriers in place that we have to equitable distribution of resources, equitable distribution of funding, and by equitable, what I mean is that we treat education like an entitlement rather than an appropriation. And so what an entitlement does is says, you must meet the need, government, regardless of what that need is. We don't have that in our education system. And that's the reason why we see gross inequity, not just in Virginia and not just across districts, but really across the nation.
And on the local school level, I think that's why it's so important, especially in Title I schools. When we are in impoverished schools, we're receiving additional funds, and it really is up to the school leader to allocate those resources appropriately so that we can remove barriers for our needy students. So I agree with you.
And Ms. Nelson, your thoughts as a parent as it relates to your children's school and funding?
Yes, so piggybacking off of what Ms. Walker said, we have to legislate change. We have to elect officials who are not using funding education as just a campaign slogan. And also what Dr. Bennett said, thinking outside the box. I know that for my children's school, I looked at a lot of grants. We were able to get an arts teacher in residence when we lacked funding for an art teacher. So that way, that's one less FTE, full-time to take out of your budget, but you can look for grants, partnerships in that manner. That's my suggestion.
I'm going to also say that leadership is one of the biggest things, because we're all waiting for Superman to come with funding and a whole bank of dollars. It's not going to happen, but the work still has to be done with the students and the need that they have. And so as an effective leader, that leader has to figure out how to utilize the funding that they have in order to maximize the actual outcome. And so the students are put first. So if that means that, you have to prioritize certain programs, ensure that certain things are in place. And the bottom line, you got to utilize some of these colleges to get some folks to work for free. There's a lot of different resources outside that some leaders are just afraid to step out of bounds to work through, and understand that there are policies and procedures at a level that you're not going to break through, but the outcome of the students is what's important. And as long as we keep our students first and foremost, then we can begin to move forward. But there's no Superman that's going to come with a bank of money. And even though we're going through COVID now and everybody's saying there's going to be funding for this, funding for that, it's going to run out. And these deficits are getting larger by the day. And so no matter how much money you received in 2020 or you're going to get by 2022, it's going to run out. And those gaps are still going to be there. And the work is still going to have to be done. And so it's going to take some leadership to make sure that it's happening.
And I would say off of that, I'm about collaboration, alliances. We need to come together. We need parents, we need students. There is no Superman, but we have power. And we have to recognize the power that we have. We need to demand the funding. Earlier, the comments made were absolutely right. The funding formula, the fact that schools receive funding based on property taxes is clearly meant to keep poor communities having inadequate education and richer communities having quality education. And we have to demand better for our communities and for our students. And so we need to come together, parents and teachers and educators and administrators and unions, and communities, we need to come together, and we need to, district by district, state by state, and nationally, federally, demand the money that we deserve and think about strategically reallocating funds. I'm not going to go into like defunding the police or anything like that, but we have to think strategically about, in these movements where they're talking about defunding, where is that money? Then where are we advocating for it to go? Where are we spending money that is wasteful, and where does it need to go be reinvested into our communities? If we're spending $10 million to have armed police in our school, and we want to say that we don't want armed police in our school, where then can we take that money and allocate it towards something that really does create a safe environment for our students? And so we need to be reimagining what schools can and should look like, and we need to demand better, because we have the power and we just need to manifest it. We need it to actually happen.
And so with that being said, I think about something that I've implemented in my school. So we have an umbrella of community-based organizations, internal, external, and what I call outside the box. And there's a lot of community-based organizations. So basically I've taken to the streets. I'm knocking on doors, safely, of course, calling on the grandparents, calling on the elders, calling on the retired. There's a lot of wisdom there that we can glean from, not just the students, but educators. Reminding us of what people have gone through, so that we could be before our children, and passing that knowledge down, because we can't pass down knowledge that we don't have ourselves. Mm-hmm. And there's a lot of organizations who need to fulfill community service hours. There are high school students who need community service hours, who would love to jump on a Zoom or group meet and show that student how to do algebra. There are those who are aspiring to become educators, who want to dip their feet in. Where in education can I go? So, those are things to think of, some strategies, some collaboration, that's the C word, to think outside the box. Tap into your churches. You have a community room. That can become a pod for the days the kids are not in school. Now that I've said my little spiel, I want to thank every panelist. The conversation was so engaging. I've learned so much. I hope everybody in the audience has learned. Anything that all resources that were shared will be sent in a follow-up email. So if you missed out on something, don't worry. There's a follow-up email. I know I'm going to be looking forward to the email because there's some things that I want to read myself. And the great thing about being an educator, it's not called stealing. We're borrowing, we're collaborating, and we can use it all for our benefit for our children. So I like to give a charge and a final thought. Everyone, starting with Ms. Walker, to provide us with a final thought and addressing contingency plans for the next emergency, and what can districts learn from this pandemic? And then we'll follow it up with Dr. Bennett, Ms. Nelson, Ms. Chavarette. Leah, I am so sorry, girl. Today I'm having tongue-tied all day. And then close it out with Dr. Clark. So, Ms. Walker, here's a thought and a charge to address strengthening our contingency plans for the next emergency, because I don't think this is it.
Right. I think, so in final thoughts, what I'll say is that this global health pandemic has really brought, it's not shown a flashlight, but a spotlight really on how our system of public education perpetuates systemic inequity, right? That's become glaringly obvious. And for those of us who do this work every day, we're not seeing things we didn't already know. It's just exacerbated by the pandemic. So as I think about what is the charge, what do we do now? What do we think about as we go forward? I think that what we really need to be pushing and advocating for is a reimagined system of public education that's designed to meet the needs of the students when they come into the door, and a system where we don't ask students to assimilate into a model that never worked for them in the first place. I think that what we need to be pushing and advocating for is not for us to never return to normal, right? And that we don't accept that what we have right now as a new normal, but we think about how can we take the lessons we've learned from delivering instruction through multiple modes, because for some students it is working and other students it isn't. So how do we take what we've learned from these different models and reimagine a public education system that is designed to meet students where they are at that moment in time? And then finally, for a charge, I think what I'll leave the group with is a quote from James Baldwin that says that not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. And so I think what we have to do is take this time to really lean into those gaps, the inequities that are systemic within public education, and begin to design interventions. And as Dr. Bettina Love would say, blow the whole thing up, right? Because we know that the system as it is will never meet the needs of every single student. But we have an opportunity to really, really reframe and rethink what a quality and equitable public education system would actually look like.
Yes, going back to what Dr. Clark said earlier in the discussion about leaders and schools really taking a look at what is needed and working collaboratively with stakeholders to make it happen. So just in the immediate, and just from a practitioner's standpoint, I would say we need to make sure that all students have one-to-one access to devices. That needs to be ongoing. So once we reopen as brick and mortar, we still need to make sure there's funding there for one-to-one devices. We need to make sure our teachers are trained properly so that they can teach in the classroom, in the brick and mortar, and also transfer to virtual when needed. That a digital platform, an ongoing digital platform for students is available. They have access now, and we're making adaptations because we're in an emergency situation. But it needs to be available at all times, because even now when you look at student availability or teacher availability for professional development or accessing learning, it needs to be available at the as the learner needs to access the information. And that may be at a different time of day. It may be during the evening when they have additional resources. So just the digital platform, I think those three items will help to lessen the digital divide and make access to education more equitable.
Dr. Clark?
I think that a lesson learned to kind of strengthen our contingency plans and things that we've learned through this pandemic is that we are all stronger by working together. And so educators across the nation needs to connect as an educators nation and begin to utilize resources and supports as well as ideas to navigate through this process. And so while many of us work in communities where there are 4 or 5 schools within 3 or 4 blocks, it's important for us to begin to share resources, because again, those resources will start to diminish, but the work will not. It's only going to grow. And so while all of us who are panelists tonight are colleagues, and so we're able to now reach out to each other and say, do you have an idea about this? Do you know something about that? How can I get access or gain access to this? There's a lot of different ways that we have to become smarter as we move forward, because another emergency is going to happen.
Yes.
And it's something that's going to blindside us. And we cannot think that once this COVID-19 has disappeared, quote unquote, that it is over and nothing else will happen. There will be something else, and we have to prepare for that. And with that, it's going to take the strength of all of us pulling together to figure out how that works. And even though we're in different locations, and we are Virginia, there's DC, there's Maryland, that we can begin to work and create this divide. The other thing we have to do is that now we're great that we have a person on the state level that we can talk to, because there's some barriers that we need to break through as we plan to work on how do we get teachers in place to utilize provisional pieces. We're going to have to break some of that bureaucracy down, because if we look at it from, there's some very smart people who could bring a lot to the educational realm, but they don't have all of the qualifications according to the standards that's there. President Barack Obama could not teach in a school, as smart as this guy is. And so we need to make sure that we are looking at some of those things as well. We have to reevaluate some of the old ideologies and begin to look at what's new in order to move forward. So collaboration, working together, education nation, we're going to make it happen.
Ms. Chavarria?
That was good. Thank you for everything my colleagues have already said. I want to put an exclamation point under what Ms. Walker said that really hit me, and I say very similar things a lot. So thank you for those comments. I think I'll leave you with find out what organizations have already been doing this work. Like we said, COVID is an exacerbation of the inequities that have already existed. And so there have been organizations that have been addressing racism and inequities in education for many, many years, and they are still working. And so find the organizations that are already doing this work and join in that fight. We need to be demanding systemic changes so that we never have to face that when there is a crisis, we are already prepared for what we are going through. The time is now to reimagine what school looks like, because we already are reimagining what school looks like. So first step in that process is recognizing that our education system was never meant for Black and brown students to begin with. And then along with that, comes along Brown versus Board of education, which, whether it was an intentional or not, the unintentional consequence or the intentional consequence, according to who you're talking to, was that there were thousands of Black teachers who were fired, we integrated Black students into a racist system with racist curriculum and majority white teachers. There was no integration of Black history studies, Black teachers. And so we are working already from that context. And so when we're reimagining what school looks like, we have an opportunity here to really create a fair and just system for all of our students and make sure that we're addressing their needs. Under many ESSA plans across the district and across states, there's an opportunity for equity policies. And so I encourage community members, educators, parents to get involved in the creation of those policies and make sure that if there is an equity policy that's being developed by your district, that it has teeth to it, that there's accountability measures so that when schools or school districts are not meeting the standards within the equity policy, that there is an accountability measure for that. It doesn't matter if there's an equity policy if there's no teeth to it and no accountability measures. We need to make sure that we're focusing on decolonizing education, looking at the things that have not worked in the past, getting rid of tracking, getting rid of siloed content, looking at our physical classroom structures and thinking about how we can reimagine the physical space that we're in, thinking about liberation pedagogy, flipping white Eurocentric norms as the norm, ending zero tolerance policies, reviewing suspension and expulsion and arrest data, and addressing the disproportionality that we see on a regular basis in brick and mortar, but also online. And then making sure that communities are involved in reviewing and auditing policies and practices with a racial justice and equity lens, and making sure that we are involving the parents and community in every decision making, that all stakeholders have a stake in and have a say in what happens in our districts.
Thank you. And Ms. Nelson?
I would say parents and guardians have now been forced to be engaged in their children's education, so we can keep that momentum when things come back to normal, and then use that network to force the legislation that has a true funding formula that provides equity and quality education. Also bring those parents and guardians into the brick and mortar and volunteer, and so that they can see what teachers go through, and they can be more supportive, and it can be a true partnership.
Thank you all. I also like to, before I give my own charge and final thought, I like to thank Joanne Otis for monitoring the chat and finding the questions. We had many questions. There are so many. We can go on for days, and especially with this great panel that you guys are. You guys are phenomenal, and thank you for giving of your time and your talent, really. So I think I'd like to leave families with a few things. Collaboration, like everyone on the panel said, collaborate. This is our time to teach. And one of my parents said this at a similar forum. She said, we get a do-over to teach our kids what the curriculum that's given to us does not. We get a do-over. So take the do-over. Teach our kids about our history, and our history does not begin with enslavement. And then finally, education is just not education. Politics and education go hand in hand. So if you didn't already, vote, and vote, because our lives depend on it. Thank you to DTEC. Thank you to everyone for participating. I want to thank the team who put this together. You guys are phenomenal. These are some phenomenal women. They really worked hard, and they continue to work hard. So follow them on Facebook, follow them on Twitter, get involved, ask what you can do to support all this education and learning. There's a lot of work to be done across this country. You see, we've come from Maryland, Virginia, New York. There is so much to be done. You can't do everything, but everyone can do something. Thank you, DMV, DTEC-TAG. Thank you, our panelists. I just want to virtually hug you guys and encourage you guys. Keep up the good fight, because our kids need us. Our kids need us. Our kids need everyone out there. If you have time to be on Facebook and listen, go out there and help us. Help us to help the kids. Help us. Help us. There's always something to do. If there's any last minute questions or comments, we have a few minutes. There is one question. Joanne Robinson from Baltimore asked, why isn't more attention given to those of us who are in the trenches with the teachers every day too?
I will triple that comment and question. That is something that we need to make sure that we are supporting and reaching out to and advocating for our education support professionals who are in the trenches with the teachers every day. And that's something that we, in the union setting, are making sure that when we're looking at educational policies, that our education support professionals are always included in that. We have many education support professionals who don't even make a living wage. That is unacceptable. It is disgusting. And many of those folks face obstacles in getting teacher certification, the same obstacles that our students face in terms of standardized testing and other obstacles. Also, the same thing holds true in that realm. But we need to be thanking our education support professionals for everything that they do. We cannot survive as teachers without them. And so, yes, more attention needs to be given to those who are in the trenches and celebrate, and not just celebrate, but advocate every single day to make sure that there is fair treatment of those who are helping our students, many times doing way more for our students than the teachers are.
And I have to say, this is a personal question for me because most might not know, but I started off as a teacher's assistant. And I was a teacher's assistant for 5 years. And my principal looked at me and said, you can't do what she does. I think you could do better. Why just see yourself as a teacher's assistant? And I'm so glad she did, or else here I am. But if you see that talent out there, encourage that paraprofessional, encourage that teacher's aide, encourage that school aide, encourage the security guard or the kitchen staff to level up, help them, let them know what the requirements are, maybe a little tutoring, but it can be done. So don't underestimate the person by the job they have. Don't underestimate yourself for mentoring them into being something more. And we need our pedagogical staff on all levels. Thank you.
I often say to my staff, everything we need to be successful, we have right under this roof. And there is no hierarchy in this building. We all have a job to do. And also, just as the leader, believing in progression within the building. Our stat teacher moved up to our assistant principal. Our classroom teachers have moved up to resource positions. Our paraeducators are engaged in the praxis test and applying for positions. So I think it's very important to grow leadership within the building. And we must celebrate every person in that building. And I often say, I'm just the principal. I am here to serve the school. This just happens to be my position. But as a leader, unless you can be in every classroom, in every place, every minute, you've got to celebrate everyone because it takes a team. Everybody is equally important in that building.
Say that again, Dr. Bennett.
Everybody. That is the truth. I wholeheartedly believe that. And I feel that I show that every day in my practices. I highlight my paraeducators, additional adult assistants, cafeteria workers, custodial staff. It takes everyone. And I tell my staff constantly, I work for you.
I love it.
And can we just lift up also the youth, our young people, and the power of our young people? Some of the best movements, the most powerful movements we've seen across this country right now in terms of educational equity work is the young folks who are stepping up. They are marching, they are fighting for rights, they are leading the charge. And I think that we don't trust our youth enough to believe that they are knowledgeable about their own experiences and how it fits into the larger context. So I want to lift up my students and the youth because I believe that they are incredibly powerful and we need to respect and acknowledge the power that they have and the knowledge that they have. So please lift up our youth and support them in their desires and in their movement too.
They're our most sustainable, valuable resource, are our youth.
Right.
And so with that being said, I'm going to bring back Miss Veronica Menifee. You're coming back? Yay! Thank you, Veronica, for putting this.
We're going to do a few more questions, then I'm going to come back.
We have time. Yes, I don't even want to let you guys go. I'm having so much fun. So Tarina Brown from Baltimore, Maryland asks, what are some assistive tech tools available for students with 504 plans and IEPs? Ms. Walker, will you take that one?
Sorry. I'm muted. That's the phrase for 2020, isn't it? Yeah, so this is probably an area that I don't actually have that much subject matter expertise in as it relates to 504 plans and IEPs. What I can say is that from the state level and what is our responsibility in terms of enforcement and implementation of federal regs, our expectation is that students who have any sort of IEP or 504 plan, one, what we have advised school districts to do in the state is to triage those students first in terms of return to school and to identify how you can meet their needs now. And even if that means bringing them back in person while other students are still continuing to receive their instruction remotely. So that's one of the things that we've been emphasizing across the state and providing a great deal of technical resource to divisions around doing that. But at the end of the day, as you all know, it is a local decision in terms of how those services get delivered to students. Our office, just to say it, is really focused more on addressing issues around racial inequity, as well as sort of all of the other manifestations around our multilingual learners, ensuring inclusive environments for LGBTQ plus students. That's where our office focuses and leans in, because we have an entire division of special education at the Department of Education that really does focus in on meeting the needs of those students when they have them. So I'll defer to anybody else on the panel who has more specific information on meeting the specific needs of those students.
I'm the moderator, so I'm not going to answer that. Anybody else want to chime in?
Assistive technology tools are provided to students with special needs. They've been able to come to our school to pick up devices, text-to-speech devices, and more specifically, we have 6 self-contained special education classes for students who have communication needs. So they have other communication devices and picture cues and such. So just making sure, again, those budgetary resources and making sure that we are providing students with the tools they need to access their education. In addition to materials, we like to make sure that we're allotting time for individualized sessions. Even though we have small group sessions, we still have to factor in that students need additional support. And then teachers are using online resources and programs just to really make sure students are receiving what they need. So I would say assistive technology is the main thing.
And so it's so funny that that question was asked, because I showed up to dress rehearsal a little late. I'm going to be honest, because I was at school handling a 504 issue with a student who's coming back in as of November 2nd in New York City. From November 2nd to November 15th, families have the option to opt back into brick and mortar. And so a parent and I had to go over the plan that she had for brick and mortar pre-COVID is not going to work according to the CDC guidelines. So when she returns, so we spent 2.5 hours going over line by line, plan by plan, movement by movement, the entire school, so that when her daughter returns, there's a plan in place where she's comfortable and it could proceed forward with her IEP goals. Edith Wright from North Fork, Virginia. Can you provide any tips on communicating with parents who are, can you provide any tips on communicating with parents who are, and those who are not able to assist their children at home, especially keeping them to a routine? Miss Nelson, some wisdom as a
yes, as I stated before, just using your parent network and being able to engage with your parent-teacher organization, and also reaching out to the teachers. Many of the teachers are willing to help and willing to assist you in developing a routine that's not that's similar to what they do in class. So that would be my advice.
Anyone else want to chime in?
Well, I just wanted to note that Ms. Menifee, during her sharing session, showed a schedule that was generated by a parent just to have in that learning space for students. So that may assist just having that visual available with the expectations for the day.
And that's important because, you know, as we're reimagining public school, one thing that is constant is a schedule. That's not going, no matter what it looks like, a routine is so important for the adolescent development.
I think also I think one of the things that's also not changing and that also is a issue pre-post COVID is making sure that we are going to parents as opposed to expecting parents to come. There are so many obstacles to parents being able to get to a building or to be able to be in the home or whatever the case may be, so that we are stepping out of our, time frames that are good for us and making sure that we are able to possibly do home visits or possibly set up in a community where we know that parents are coming back and forth. I'm one of the heads of the diversity, equity, and inclusion cohort of my building. And one of the things that we are taking a very hard look at is how we are communicating with parents and making sure that we are going to our parents and not expecting our parents to have to come to us. Although, because many would like to, they send their brightest and their best every day. It's just that we need to remove the obstacles to doing that. Like the liberation.
Ladies first.
Oh, thank you. Well, I think I just wanted to add this because I wanted to say this earlier and didn't get an opportunity to, and that is that, we need to manage our expectations as well, right? In this environment where remote instruction is being provided and virtual learning, this is hard on kids. It is not easy for them. As hard as it is for teachers and parents, it's also really, really hard for them. They are disconnected from their social networks. They are having to adapt to a whole different scholastic experience. And there's going to be trauma associated that for many, many of our students. And I think what we really need to just stay mindful of is that it is probably a flawed approach to try to replicate your lesson plan that you give in an in-person setting in a virtual setting. Mm-hmm. It is probably not a good idea to design a remote instructional day around the type of hours that students would be connecting in an in-person setting, because they're not in person. And the expectations of what students can do and the pace at which they can self-direct their learning is something we need to be thinking about and making sure that we are extending the appropriate amount of grace and latitude for students during this time. I was having a conversation with a parent who told me that his daughter had 5 hours of homework every day and she was 12 in this virtual setting. And I said to him, you need to call the superintendent. That is ridiculous. No 12-year-old should be doing 5 hours worth of at-home learning, whether it's homework or whatever you want, or asynchronous, whatever term you want to use for it. That's inappropriate and that's too much. And it's placing undue burden on kids. And so I just want to say, let us all the educators who are listening to this and those of us who are on the panel, yes, we have a job to do. We have curriculum that we have to follow, but we need to really stay mindful of the context in the world that our kids are coming to us in, and just, extend that grace as much as we possibly can.
Ms. Walker, you just said, you dropped the mic on that. I really, really appreciate that. I guess I'm going to be the bearer of bad news in a lot of instances because we have not said some things that's important. We can't make excuses for parents for being parents either. And I just want to make sure that we never confuse that. Like, they have a job to do. And while educators, we work really, really hard and we're doing overtime. We're doing everything out of the box. And many of us are still parents that, we're having to create an environment and do things that's necessary for our own children. And we have some young parents that are teachers and they're trying to figure it out. And so while we're trying to support all the parents appropriately, as leaders, we're going to have to tell the parents some truths. Like, this is the deal. You got a job to do with your child. I understand whatever circumstances you're under, but let's not let the parents off the hook either, because they have a job to do. And I know a lot of them, they say, well, I can't get to the school, I can't get to this. Well, they still getting out and doing different things. All right. And so you got to be willing to do it. Now, I work really diligently and I love my parents, but the ones that I have to breathe on in a different way, I'm willing to do it because it's necessary in order for us to be successful. And we can give all the tips we want, and yet still there's some, let's just be honest, there's some family members, some parents that have tried to take advantage of this whole scenario. And the educators have been working very hard to create a very thoughtful and substantive environment for kids to learn. We cannot escape the fact that we have to hold parents accountable to ensure that they are doing their part as well. And you're right, Ms. Walker, our teachers that are given so much work, it's criminal, it's busy work, and that shouldn't happen. But we also need parents to create a constructive opportunity for the kids to learn. And then I also saw that there was a question about the parents needing tips that they can't set up or monitor. I forget what the question was exactly, but it was something about, a parent not having the time or the ability to ensure that their students doing whatever they're supposed to do. Well, that's still the responsibility of the parent, and whether they have to write it out in a note and hold kids accountable to that. When I was growing up, you had chores. There was a certain time you were supposed to do it, whether mom and dad were home or not. There's some things that we have to do with our children. Wake up, you got to get up at a certain time, get moving, and we have to get them in a routine, whether the parents are there or not. And so let's not lay off of these parents while we're thinking of all this brilliant stuff. Let's make sure that they are part of the conversation, but they are accountable for their children.
So accountability and collaboration. We're going to have one final question before, I know I'm trying to hold on to you guys so much, but I believe it was, what type of mental health supports are teachers and families receiving from school districts? Or are school systems collaborating with mental health providers in the community? Dr. Bennett?
Yes, our school district has a partnership with several mental health providers. They are reaching out to families. So one of the main drawbacks, I will say, and it's even with our in-school mental health support, such as social workers and guidance counselors, it's just the confidentiality piece. When you are in a virtual setting, such as this, you don't know who's in the room, who's listening. And so that creates a new challenge around students receiving services. But to answer the question, yes, school districts are partnering with mental health professionals, and students are receiving much needed guidance sessions, because with this pandemic, there is a huge mental health crisis. Yeah. Students are losing parents and other family members, and just the social aspect of being removed from school and not seeing friends. So it's very important, and that is certainly something that is ongoing, that collaboration between school districts and mental health professionals.
Definitely. And so I'm going to bring the time to, so I'm going to bring Ms. Veronica McAfee back. We're going to be back to give us closing remarks.
Okay, thank you so much, panelists, and thank you, Dr. for this engaging conversation. We've heard from the chat that we're definitely going to have to do a part 2. They're like, we want to have more. So on behalf of the DTEC-TAG DMV team, I want to thank you, our distinguished panelists and agents for Change for Education, Dr. Nashay Bennett, Erica Strauss-Chavaria, Dr. Marco Clark, Nicole Nelson, and Leodosia Walker, and our outstanding moderator, Dr. Brown. I also want to just give a quick shout out to Dr. Chavaria. I hope I'm not making it so bad. I hope that I got your name semi-correctly, if not correct. The Baltimore Sun Women to Watch actually honored her this past weekend. So if you can check that out, please do so. So congratulations to you for getting that. We also will be sending each of you a small token of our appreciation for joining us tonight for our panel. We also want to thank each and every one of you, our viewers, for supporting us this evening and becoming a part of our coalition. We're going to reach out to you and extend a helping hand, and we want you to advocate for change that benefits our children. So join us, and you can see on our screen how you can engage with us on Facebook. You can join us on Instagram as well as Twitter, and you can also email us. Our next webinar is going to happen on December 12th, and it's going to be from 10 to 12, and it's called Who Will Teach Us? So we hope that you will join us for that. Also, we would like to thank our DTEC-TAG agents, Simone Walden and Tia Gilliam Wilson, for producing today's show. We also want to thank Ms. Keisha Chandler, our chairperson for the DMV DTEC-TAG team and a tireless champion for education and for all that she does. We so appreciate you. We want to thank the planning committee, Denise Harrington, Crystal Pauls, Joanne Otis, and lastly, we want to thank DREF, which is the Delta Research and Educational Foundation, where DTEC-TAG collaboratively works with. And we want to tell you the other teams that consist of the DTEC-TAG teams. It is Texas, Tennessee, Florida, Georgia, North Carolina, and my team, the home team, the DMV team. Thank you to our national project director, Dr. Johnny Cruz Craig. She's our visionary leader who also reminds us that education is a heart matter. And our hardworking program assistant, Princess Streeter. As you can see, the survey is scrolling. We ask that you please complete that so that we can have the needed feedback and also engage with you further from tonight. We also would like you to follow us again, social media. And as we end this webinar, we ask that you just keep us in mind for upcoming future webinars and stay for a short video that tells you about who we are and what we do for education. So have a good night, and thank you again for joining us.
We gotta fight against them, but we need numbers. We need to show up at school board meetings. We need to show up at county commissioner meetings. We need to have someone on the agenda to talk and know what they're talking about to advocate.